All right, we'll get back into the football side of things here. We'll bring on Kyle Hunter from HunterSportsPicks.com for our Week 9 college football first look. Kyle, how's it going, man?
It's going pretty good, man. A little bit of a different weekend for me this past weekend. Had a wedding on Saturday, and then yesterday was my wife and I's anniversary. So not quite as attached to the sports world and paying as much attention this past weekend as I normally did, but had a 7-3 Saturday in college football and 2-1 yesterday in the NFL. So it was nice to not, sweat out those games and then come back to some winners.
Well, congratulations on the anniversary, sir. It's a good run so far, and hopefully you don't do anything to screw it up, which is kind of the goal that all of us men have. When we find someone that actually wants to be around us, we try not to screw it up too badly there. But, I was talking at the top of the show a little bit here today. It's already Week 9, man. Like, next Tuesday is Halloween, and then it's you start worrying about Christmas shopping and Thanksgiving and all this other bullshit. I mean, it's insane. The season's flying by.
Oh, it's absolutely flying by. I mean, it's hard to believe. I mean, it seems like just a few weeks ago we were doing the first show, and here it is, Week 9. It's a time of the year that obviously we both love, a lot of sports bettors love, and sports fans in general love. I will say the good thing is there's still a lot of really good football games left. We have some really good rivalry games coming up in the weeks ahead, and then obviously bowl season's a lot of fun. Conference championship games are a lot of fun. So even though we've gone through quite a bit of the season, there's a lot of good games left.
Yeah, there certainly are. And as we get deeper into October here, and then as we go on into November as well, and obviously this is something that carries over into the NFL in December, and then I believe Week 17 finishes up in January this year, weather becoming more of a factor. We actually had a listener question about this in terms of looking for reliable sources to find good weather forecasts, because that's very, very important here at this time of the year. We talk about snow starting to become an issue in some of the higher elevations, and then even in other parts of the country, it's obviously getting rainier now that we're getting away from the summer months. And as you know, the biggest factor for both Kyle and I and a lot of other sharp handicappers out there, although maybe I shouldn't call myself sharp, is wind. Wind is certainly a big deal as well. So what resources do you use in terms of getting weather forecasts?
Yeah, this was a good question. First of all, I would say, I've said this before, but you got to be careful when you look at a weather forecast. You can't look at a weather forecast on a Monday or Tuesday for a game on a Saturday or Sunday and think it's extremely reliable. I mean, everybody knows that weather is a difficult science. So I think you got to look, Wednesday or Thursday for the Saturday game. So you want to try to get ahead of the line move, but you don't want to be too early to where you're firing pretty big on something where the weather could change a lot. I don't really have a great scientific way to do this, other than what I try to do is look at a general picture of, the map of the United States and see where the weather is going to be bad and try to zero in on some games from that area. And then I just use multiple sources, and try to average the forecast out. I use AccuWeather. I use the National Weather Service website. Usually I take a blend of what those two websites show, and most of those sites don't get very specific about wind until 2 or 3 days before anyway. So I think that's a good way to point out that, you don't really know what it's going to be really far in advance. But I think that's the best way to do it, is to, look at a general map of the United States, and you'll see that, one area has got pure sunshine and not much going on. And you see, thunderstorms in one area and a cold front or something like that coming through to where there's going to be wind and rain. And if you can find an area where there's going to be something like that, then you just start typing in the city, say it's going to be at the Texas Tech game. You type in Lubbock, Texas, and you look at the weather on a couple different places. I mean, that's how I do it. It's not, I wouldn't pretend to say that it's the fastest way to do it. It takes some time. I wish there was one website that would just kind of, be extremely reliable, and it would just show every, game day for college football. At the NFL, there are some sites that have NFL weather that you can just look at those. College football is a little bit tougher, but at the same time, we've talked about this before. I actually kind of like it that way. If you have to dig deep and you look for those under-the-radar things, you get more value anyway. So I think it's actually a good thing. You have to put a little bit of work in to get there. And, you can see some really good examples of why weather matters. Colorado and Washington State this past Saturday night. I had the under in that game solely because of the weather. Colorado couldn't do anything on offense. Washington State wasn't very good in that game. Got back from the wedding just in time to watch a little bit of that game, and it was clear that the weather was a major problem in that game. It was raining and 40 degrees and 20-mile-per-hour wind. That's just really hard for college kids or even pros to compete in and score very much. And I think it's it's a good question, and I think it's just important to everybody out there to pay really close attention to the weather, because I think especially in the totals market, weather means a lot. And like I've said before too, if you don't want to play totals much, if you see a lot of wind and you get a big underdog, that big underdog's going to catch some steam too. So that's something to look for.
Yeah, and of course too, I mean, it's dependent on how the team runs its offense. I mean, if it was supposed to be really windy with an air raid team or something like that, then obviously that's not a side I'd be interested in playing. Even if my power ratings may suggest that there's some value on that number, still not a side that I'm going to play. I generally use the National Weather Service because I really like their hourly weather graph that's going to tell you how much precipitation is expected, what the chance is, what the sustained winds are, and also what the gusts are going to be. And I like the National Weather Service for that. But again, it is something that you certainly do want to pay attention to. And of course, too, use some common sense about it as well. If you've got, I mean, I don't know if they play each other at any point this year, but if you've got something like Florida State going up to Pitt, or one of these other warm weather, like let's say you've got a game maybe where it's snowing in El Paso up there in higher elevation, and you've got like UAB going out there or something like that. That's a situation, too, where if you've got a team that's not really used to that climate, and, of course, El Paso's got the elevation anyway, if you got a team that's not really used to that climate and they got to go up there and play in November or in the NFL in December, I mean, it's kind of obvious. And it's not always built into the line because it's something that odds makers are, going to let the betting market do. They're going to let the betting market dictate how much that matters and then adjust accordingly. So you can find some good value, in both of those leagues. And, of course, one other thing here as we get into college basketball season, you still need to keep an eye on the weather because a lot of teams in these smaller conferences will travel by bus, or teams in some of the other conferences will have flight delays due to weather, stuff like that. So you don't really think about weather being a factor when it comes to an indoor sport, but it's a travel consideration that can really throw teams off.
Yeah, it is. Obviously, it's less of a factor than it is in college football, but nobody thinks it's any factor in college basketball, so it's a good thing to point out. One more thing I wanted to point out when it comes to college football that I should have said here a minute ago, but I like playing the under better in these windy, wind and rain and wind and snow together. Wind by itself is the biggest factor, but if you get wind and snow or rain, it's really, really tough to score. The thing I like to do the most, though, is I like to play unders on passing teams, teams that throw it a lot. And you can look up percentage of plays, what kind of percentage do they throw on compared to run. I think that's another good resource to use is to look up and see, which teams are probably going to have to run that don't usually like to run the football. And, if you catch a team that is normally a passing team, an air raid offense or something like that, and they're going to have to run the ball a lot more. I think that's a lot better way to play an under in bad weather than it is, obviously, with a team that's going to be running every single play anyways. It's not going to bother them as much.
All right, let's take a look back here at Week 8 with our Quick Hitters segment. We'd like to talk about some news notes, injury updates, some trends, leading scores, all type of stuff here to help set you up for success in Week 9. We'd like to call this our Quick Hitters segment. So, Kyle, what do you got as your first point here?
I don't have as many quick hitters as I normally do. Like I said, I'm trying to kind of just cram everything in here this morning. But Middle Tennessee State, their season's really been derailed by injuries this season. Stockstill's still out. Richie James played again the last couple of games and then got hurt last week in their loss to Marshall. James is out indefinitely. No word on when Stockstill's going to come back. I know he wants to come back this year. This MTSU team, I think, is a team that had a lot of potential this season. They could have scored a lot of points there in Conference USA, but it's really hard when you have your top two players out almost every single week.
Yeah, it really is. And Middle Tennessee State is a team that I liked coming into the season, and I've struggled to adjust them because I really like their coordinators. I think Tony Franklin and Scott Schaefer can get a lot out of this team. even with some of the guys that have been hurt for them. But it just, Scott Hafer's done okay with the defense, but Tony Franklin's just working with, he's kind of sitting there trying to play solitaire, but he's missing like 6 or 7 cards from the deck. And that just makes it nearly impossible.
Yeah, I still think Franklin's a really good offensive coordinator. Urzua, that's the quarterback there at MTSU right now, he's got some real turnover problems. A guy that doesn't take care of the ball at all, and they can move up and down the field a decent amount, but they turn it over a bunch. So that's been a real problem for them. And, as long as Stockstill and James are out, MTSU is a hard team to back right now. Shea Patterson, this one's not as under the radar, but out for the season with the knee injury there at Ole Miss. This is a team that's had a difficult season overall. Obviously when Hugh Freeze left the way he did at the beginning of the season, right before the season, you knew it was going to be a difficult season for them, and you wondered what you could get out of him. Patterson was a really highly touted guy. He has loads of potential. This is a big loss for Ole Miss. This is a team that I'm going to have a really hard time backing them. There's going to have to be some numbers that I really like if I want to play them moving forward.
What sort of adjustment would you make in your power? Actually, the first I've noticed this, so I did miss this injury yesterday, and I'll have to make a note in my power ratings here accordingly. But how many points is this guy worth for you right now? He did take over pretty much as a first starter. It sort of feels like Ole Miss is a system offense, but still, you have to figure there's some sort of drop-off here.
Yeah, I'd have to look and see what the backups look like, but I think that there would be at least a field goal difference there. Patterson has actually been pretty good. He threw 3 interceptions before he got hurt against LSU. 2 games before that, he had been very good for Ole Miss. I'm just, a guess is 3 points, but I'd have to look at that more closely. Like I said, I haven't gotten very far in my work so far this week, so I think there's going to be an adjustment. I don't think it'll be a huge adjustment like you could with some other spots, but I think there has to be an adjustment here. And, I wonder about the team's psyche going forward. I just wonder, how much is this team really going to care about the rest of this season?
You know what? That was exactly where I was going to go next, and I'm glad that you and I are on the same wavelength there because they have a guy that's an interim head coach. They're not going to keep him around. I think his name is Matt Luke. They're not going to keep him around here. So, do they play for him? Do they get motivated? Like, the hard part of their schedule is behind them. They played Alabama, Auburn, and LSU in the span of 4 games. Now they got Arkansas this week at Kentucky. Kentucky's kind of a team with stock profile that's trending down. Louisiana Lafayette they should beat. Texas A&M at home. Texas A&M is going to be a road favorite there in Oxford, but not a big one. And then the Egg Bowl at the end of the year. So the schedule has softened up a little bit. But how invested is this team to go 3-2 and get to a bowl game? I don't really know.
I'd be surprised if they cared a lot to get to a bowl game at this point. I know there have been some articles put out there where this team was trying to play for Luke, the coach right now. But really deep down, do these guys really think that Luke's going to get this job? I don't think so. I would really highly question it. And like I said, my number is going to have to be way off from what the actual line is for me to take Mississippi. Now, it's one of those spots where I think this is one of those times where you don't want to have that, set amount of points that's off of your number to where you have to play a team. You have to put some kind of context to it because I don't think Mississippi's a team I'm going to want to back here going forward. UNLV, Armani Rogers is questionable for Saturday against Fresno State. A couple of reasons I wanted to point this one out. First, I think Rogers is a really good runner. I like his upside potential for UNLV. I think it's a decent drop-off behind him, so you have to keep an eye on that injury. Second, what about Fresno State? Talk about a team that's moving up in my power rating. I could have seen this offense being a lot better this year, and it doesn't surprise me that they are better. What really surprises me is that Fresno State's defense has been so good. I never saw this Fresno State defense being this good this year. So very interesting out of Fresno State so far this year.
I actually want to correct something I just mentioned there, and I was trying to look this up on the fly because I was thinking that this was a thing. Ole Miss has a self-imposed bowl ban for this year anyway, so they actually can't go to a bowl game. So that adds even more fuel to the fire, that they really have nothing to play for the rest of the way, except for maybe knocking off Mississippi State in the rivalry game at the end of the year. But I just wanted to make sure that I corrected that. And as far as Fresno State goes, I mean, I adjusted this team up 6.5 points in my power ratings this week, which is a remarkable adjustment here this late in the year. And my number is still low on them, so I don't know what I'm supposed to do.
I think Fresno State got steamed in a big way last weekend, didn't they? I mean, the line was like 11.5. I don't know what it closed at, but I know Fresno State got a lot of sharp money in that game. I really cannot believe Fresno State beat San Diego State the way they did. That one, when I looked at that score on Saturday night, that was the one that really stunned me out of all the games.
Yeah, it stunned me too. Now you got San Diego State going out on the road to play on the island against Hawaii, and I don't know what the state of that team is. I mean, Rocky Long is a good head coach, and one of the things that we did talk about a little bit on last week's show, I think this was with Brad Powers when we discussed that San Diego State-Fresno State game, is that with San Diego State losing, the week prior to Boise State, that took away any chance they had of their six bowl game. And I don't know if they would have done it anyway with what Central Florida and South Florida are doing this year, but they had 2 wins over the Pac-12 teams, and then blown out by Boise State at home. Looks like there was a hangover effect last week. Like, I don't know what to do with this team laying 9 on the road in Hawaii. They'll lay a big number on the road in San Jose State the following game. I don't know what to do with San Diego State now going forward.
Well, I think Rocky Long's a good coach, so I don't think they'll completely fall apart. But, that San Diego State-Hawaii game is not one I'd want to bet this weekend. I think that'd be a really quick pass for me. I think that in the long term, San Diego State's going to be okay. I'd be surprised if it completely falls apart. But at the same time, I don't really want to run to back them right now, especially we've talked about how tough it is to play in Hawaii. San Diego State's pretty used to it, so that helps them. But still, I think that's a difficult spot. One other thing I wanted to point out here real quick is I wanted to give a quick plug to the CFB Situational Spots article I do weekly at BangTheBook.com. Last week during the week, I actually had a regular listener reach out and ask about a game that was actually in the write-up. And when I mentioned this article, he said he didn't even know I wrote the weekly article at the site. And I think I've talked about the misleading final scores article and haven't really talked about the situational spots article. So I wanted to give a quick plug to it. And I think a good example of a really good spot that came from that article was last weekend's UMass game against Georgia Southern. UMass had 2 weeks off to get ready for that triple option. Georgia Southern was leaving league play for 1 game to travel a really long ways to play UMass. That was a really bad spot for them and a big edge to UMass in the spot, and I think it showed on the field on Saturday.
And that's one of those, too, where when you were looking up and down Twitter about that game, you could see some of the writers that follow college football just sort of openly asking, like, what the hell is wrong with Georgia Southern? Like, this is such a huge fall from grace from when Willie Fritz was there. And, yeah, I mean, they're not as good with Tyson Summers, and that's very obvious. And I imagine that they're going to be making a coaching change here soon. But that was one of those where it was all about, well, what's wrong with Georgia Southern, as opposed to, oh, hell, this spot was really bad for Georgia Southern. So not to say that you want to run to back the Eagles at all throughout the rest of the season here, but still, that is one of those situations where you may get a little bit of perception value, because getting blown out by UMass is a really, really depressing thing. But the spot, as you mentioned, was just so bad that maybe that's not the greatest indicator of just how bad Georgia Southern is.
Yeah, I think it's hard because I think you're right that this is one of those spots where getting blown out by UMass would probably create some value in the average spot. The only question is, has Tyson Summers just lost his team? I would be really, really surprised if he's back next year. I know that there's a lot of pressure on him. This is a Georgia Southern team that kind of got used to winning under Fritz, and now they've been so bad that, it's kind of hard to say what to expect from them. I would think that there would be some value at some point here in the coming weeks because, when you get beat up by UMass, it's going to be a pretty big stock drop.
So I'll tell you what, I mean, I was writing all morning long. I barely even looked at too much news or anything like that. Tyson Summers has already been fired. He was actually fired yesterday. So I thought I saw something in passing where somebody listed some of the possible head coaching candidates for the Georgia Southern job, and now it all makes sense. So, we'll see if they do want to continue running the triple option. But I'll tell you what, we've missed a couple of news items here already at the start of the show here, and, I missed the bowl ban for Ole Miss earlier in the year. just a reminder that, even for people like us that live and breathe this type of thing and are always looking for this information, with 130 teams, sometimes stuff just gets lost in the shuffle. And obviously that's kind of being illustrated here so far today.
Yeah, it's pretty funny because, here I am talking about Tyson Summers and how would they be fired up to play for him, and he's already been fired. But kind of an ironic thing. I think it goes to show you, too, that, when you're kind of disconnected, as I was for the last couple of days from the sports world, a lot of things can happen. I know one thing my wife pointed out to me now for the last 3 years on the day of our anniversary, the weekend of our anniversary. It's been like the best weekend I've had out of the entire season as far as how my plays have done. So my wife has tried to convince me that it's good luck, that it's, my anniversary weekend. So I've got that going, but I kind of, I've missed out on some news items.
All right, anything else in the quick hitters, or should we move on to the game breakdowns here before we miss something else?
I was going to say, let's do the game breakdowns, and let's hope that we don't miss anything else.
All right, we'll go to Thursday night here, and this is kind of, I guess, maybe the unofficial kickoff of Maction. I don't know if we want to call it that, but I know that we've got a Tuesday night game on Halloween next week between Ohio and Miami of Ohio, so we're getting into those midweek Maction games here a little bit. 2 games coming up on Thursday. Not going to talk about Toledo and Ball State, where Toledo's a 26-point road favorite, but we will touch on this Eastern Michigan, Northern Illinois game 107, 108 on the board. We're seeing Eastern Michigan money here on Monday morning. This number opened 8, went down to about 7.5 pretty much across the board. Now we're seeing some 7s out there, a little bit of extra juice on the Northern Illinois side if you want to take the -7. But it does look like early in the week here, Kyle, Eastern Michigan the preferred side.
Yeah, Eastern Michigan's clearly a program on the rise. There's no doubt about that. I think they had a tough loss there last weekend, if I remember right. Didn't they lose a close one to Western Michigan?
Well, they did.
They did? Is that what you said?
Yeah, they did. It's a rivalry game, too. So, that's a challenging little spot for them as well.
Yeah, my connection's breaking up a little bit here. So, yeah, the Eastern Michigan side, I think it's a little bit of a difficult spot for them coming off last week. I talked about how I thought in the situational spots article it was a tough spot for both Eastern Michigan and Western Michigan, because Eastern Michigan was coming off that Army game. And, obviously it's hard when you're coming off a team that's cut blocking all game long. And then they lose that tough game last week. So I'd be a little bit worried. This is a short turnaround again. I think this isn't a great spot for Eastern Michigan. I understand why people want to take the points, because Eastern Michigan's defense has been good this year. If you look at both defenses here, though, Northern Illinois has been tremendous defensively. Northern Illinois has allowed 0 plays of 50 yards or more so far this year. There's only 9 teams in the country that have done that, and they're one of them. And on the other side, Eastern Michigan's only allowed 4 plays of 40 yards or more, which is 15th best in the country. So 2 defenses that don't give up the big play. I could see this being a pretty low-scoring game. I don't think this is going to be one of those Maction games where it gets really high scoring. I'm sure that the total is going to be low on this game. So I think that this is one where it might also be one of those spots where people are wanting to grab the points because points may be at a premium.
Yeah, I like that. I like the points being at a premium. I like taking the underdog here in this one. My number on this game is Northern Illinois -4.5. So when you consider that it should be a pretty low total for this one as well, I think getting the 7.5 is pretty nice. And the spot is priced into the line here as far as I'm concerned, because when you look at Eastern Michigan's 5 losses, and they've all come in a row, they haven't lost a game by more than 7 points this year. So, when you factor that into the equation, the fact that this number is sitting there at 7.5 or opened at 8 leads me to believe that this spot is priced into the number here. With that in mind, I like Eastern Michigan in this spot. If you caught the 4 on them last week, you were a winner. If you caught one of the later numbers, you were a loser. They lost 20-17 in overtime, actually, too, to Western Michigan. So, yeah, the spot is really bad, but you have this Eastern Michigan team that, they're 2-5 on the year, and a lot of people are just going to look at this and say, well, I remember Eastern Michigan being really bad, and they're 2-5 here again this year, so they must be bad again. But they're 5-2 against the number. The problem is that they just haven't been on the right side of variance at all in any of these one-possession games that they've played. I don't know if they will be this week necessarily. I think they're a very good play-on team against Ball State next week, but I do like them here in a game that, as you mentioned, should be very low scoring.
Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to give the other side, you'd say that Northern Illinois' defense has been even better than Eastern Michigan. Northern Illinois is only giving up 4.14 yards per play, which is fourth in the country, behind only Washington, Bama, and Penn State. So Northern Illinois' defense has been really good. I wouldn't want to lay the points here with Northern Illinois. I don't know that I'll play this game in either way. I just think that, the under would be the way I would look, but actually, as we're talking right here, I see BetOnline's releasing totals, and it came out at 43.5. So this is definitely a really low total game. I don't like under 43.5. I think that's too low to take the under. But I think it makes sense to be grabbing, 7.5 points when you've got a total like that.
I apologize. I know hitting BetOnline openers with totals is a big part of your personal betting, so I am sorry about that. We'll try to move through things quickly here and hope that you can grab on some of those numbers. Let's go to Friday night in the ACC. Florida State on the road as a short favorite. They're favored by a field goal against Boston College. And this is one of those games that as I was putting together my power ratings and looking at my numbers and all that, I don't know how to price Florida State. I really don't. From a talent standpoint, this team still has a ton of it. Even though DeAndre Francois is out, even though James Blackman hasn't looked great, there's still so much talent on this team. So much more talent than Boston College. All of a sudden, the Eagles with 86 points the last 2 weeks, I don't know what's going on there.
Yeah, Boston College, they've been running the football really well, as far as I know, at least. I know they did a couple games ago. Boston College is a team that I wouldn't trust their offense still. I know, they've been scoring here lately, but Boston College 41-10 over Virginia here. See, you can tell that I definitely didn't pay as much attention on Saturday and Sunday as I normally do. But that's a really surprising game. Boston College over Virginia 41-10. I don't remember what the line was, but I'm sure Virginia was favored in that one. So, Boston College to me is a team that they have a really good defense. They play solid defense, don't give up big plays. They play a lot of low-scoring games. I know that they've scored a lot here in the last couple games, but I still don't trust the offense, especially throwing. I think they can get some yards running, but I think Florida State's going to make them throw it here. I think we're getting some line value here on Florida State based on what Boston College has done here lately. And, I would take Florida State if I was betting this game. I think -3 is a decent price on them here. Florida State's defense is still very good. Florida State has a lot of talent. Like you said, it's a big talent edge for them. I still think Fisher's a really good coach. And, just in general, it wouldn't be a spot where I'd be interested in taking Boston College. It would either be Florida State or pass.
Well, and here's the thing, too, for Florida State, and this is something that you have to consider going forward here. They play at Clemson on November 11th. They're very likely to lose that game. They're going to wind up being a much bigger dog than expected in that game as well. Florida on November 25th, who knows what the state of the Florida Gators will be by that point. But because Florida State lost that win that they would have gotten over Louisiana Monroe, they're 2-4 right now and only have 5 games left to play. They'll beat Delaware State, so that'll be a win. So they'll have 3 wins, and they'll need 3 more out of these last 4 games for them to even make a bowl game. So, this is one of those situations where all of a sudden the motivations for Florida State, they're different from what they were because this was a team that wanted to win the college football playoff. Now they're just fighting to get to a damn bowl game. And you got to wonder, what sort of impact that has on this team. If they lose this Boston College game this week, I don't know what they'll look like against Syracuse. I know Jimbo Fisher's a good head coach, but, he had some interesting comments to the media after the last game against Louisville, almost had to defend the program, defend the players. It's not a good look right now, and they can't put any consistency together. I get why the number is where it is. From a power rating standpoint, the number is too low for me. But, man, I don't know if I could touch Florida State right now.
Yeah, I understand that. I think they're a hard team to back right now. I feel like the talent's going to show up here one of these games for Florida State. I think they're too good to lose that many games. But like you say, I will say, if they lose this game, they see the writing on the wall, and they know they're going to miss a bowl game. So then you really wonder what happens to them. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. If they lose this game, I think it'd be really interesting to see what the lines on them are going to be throughout the course of the season. I probably won't bet this game, but I do lean Florida State here.
There are two games that I really love here coming up on Saturday. We're going to talk about both of them to wrap up our in-depth game breakdowns, then run through the pick six and Kyle's exclusive free pick. Game 143, 144 on the board. Oklahoma State laying 7.5 at most places. There's a rogue 8 out there at Matchbook. There's some 7s as well at Heritage and DSI. But Oklahoma State's going on the road to Morgantown to take on West Virginia with an early kick. Now, numbers standpoint, you probably like Oklahoma State in this game, and certainly that's what the line movement would suggest because this number opened 7, went up to 7.5 or 8. Now it's starting to come back down a little bit. But situationally speaking, long trip out to Morgantown, early kickoff, challenging environment. This seems like one of those Dana Holgerson upset type spots, doesn't it?
This is a really hard game to handicap. I will say I looked at this game a decent amount when you sent this over. West Virginia's defense has been really bad this year. They're 105th in the nation in yards per play allowed, 6.26 per play. That's a tough matchup for them because Oklahoma State can obviously put up a lot of big plays. I still don't fully trust Oklahoma State's defense, but they've been much better at number 21 in yards per play allowed. I don't like going against West Virginia and Morgantown, so I won't lay the points with Oklahoma State. Even though I do think from a power rating standpoint, this number is too short. At the same time, West Virginia, like I say, I like backing them at home. It's hard to back them here in this spot for me. I don't think I can back them because I think Oklahoma State's passing game specifically has such a big edge on West Virginia's secondary that it won't surprise me if Mason Rudolph puts up a really big numbers here as far as, one of those 400-yard-plus passing days. Now, I think West Virginia is going to get theirs, too. This is going to be a really high total. But it's a tough spot, like you said, for Oklahoma State. It won't shock me if Oklahoma State would lose this game, and like you said, it could be that upset special. But at the same time, this is going to be one of those games that doesn't surprise me if Oklahoma State wins by quite a bit either because West Virginia's offense is going to have to score just about every single time, I think. I think Oklahoma State's going to score a lot in this game. Like I say, West Virginia's defensive numbers, the more you look at them, the worse they look. So tough game to handicap here.
It is a tough game to handicap, and let's go ahead and throw another wrinkle in there. Oklahoma State plays Bedlam at home against Oklahoma next week, and this is a series where Oklahoma's won 12 of the last 14 games. So for Oklahoma State here, I mean, it's not just going out on the road and winning this tough game in Morgantown, back-to-back road games after playing Texas this past week. Then they've got Oklahoma on deck. And then you look at a possible letdown spot against an Iowa State team that the advanced metrics, particularly Bill Connolly's S&P, absolutely love. So for Oklahoma State here, these next 3 weeks really define what the ceiling is for their season. And it's to me, I mean, from a spot standpoint, I'm almost looking to play West Virginia here plus 7.5. I know statistically, like I said, it doesn't really line up. But, man, this schedule is really, really brutal for Oklahoma State, especially with what looks like kind of a vulnerable Oklahoma team coming up next week, maybe one of the more vulnerable Oklahoma teams that we've seen in this series. So I don't know how Mike Gundy is going to have this team ready to get off the mat 3 straight weeks, but, Dana Holgerson's probably had this game circled. I mean, Texas Tech went out there. West Virginia took care of business in that game. It wasn't always pretty, but they did it. So I don't know, man, but it should be a great one to watch to kick off your college football Saturday.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you're definitely right, too, that Oklahoma State has got to be fired up about that game against Oklahoma. So this is one of those spots where it could be easy to be looking ahead. So I wouldn't want to lay the points. I don't really want to bet West Virginia after I look at the game closely as far as stats. So I think if you play West Virginia here, you have to just play it on the situational end.
All right, well, let's go to 3:30, Ohio Stadium, the Horseshoe. Penn State takes on Ohio State. Wish this was a night game. Actually glad it's not because I have to go to a Halloween party on Saturday. And with it being at 3:30, I can actually watch the game. But this is a remarkably difficult handicapping spot as far as I'm concerned. I get the line, Ohio State -6. That's pretty much where my power ratings would put this thing. There are a few 6.5s out there as well. But this falls into a similar umbrella for me as the Penn State game last week. Because you look at Penn State's body of work and you're kind of looking around like, okay, when did they actually play somebody? Then they run into somebody in Michigan and they absolutely destroyed them. For Ohio State, since beating Oklahoma, they have played absolutely nobody. But, of course, they've scored at least 38 points in all 5 of those games, and they've scored at least 54 points in each of the last 4 games. So Ohio State's better than they were when they lost to Oklahoma, but we haven't seen them play an actual team. So I don't know what to do with the Buckeyes here.
Yeah, I mean, obviously this is a huge game. I wonder how good Michigan really is. I mean, I didn't get to watch very much of that game, but I think Michigan's defense has been really good throughout the course of the season, so it surprised me that Penn State scored that many points. Like I said, I had a really good Saturday. One of my losses was the under in that game. I expected that to be a lower scoring game. Got a good number, got under 45, and it didn't matter. Penn State almost scored that by themselves. So, I think Penn State's offense was really impressive in that game. I will say this game fits the bye week angle that I talked about last week on the show. Really good teams of 70% or better winning percentage coming off a bye week and then laying 9 points or less, 86 and 38 against the spread. That's 69.5%. And Ohio State is in that spot here with more rests than the other team, laying a short number. I think this is a good spot for Ohio State. I went to that game last year at Penn State, Ohio State and Penn State, and Ohio State should have won that game. Neither team played well. And I think it's very fair to say that both teams are a lot better than they were last year at this time. Ohio State controlled as far as the total yards in that game, and then that block kick ran back for a touchdown just completely changed how the game went. I don't have any doubt that Ohio State has circled this game. I mean, they have to be extremely excited about this game. At the same time, I think Ohio State has a lot to prove as far as, in big games. JT Barrett hasn't played very well against good defenses, several times in a row now. And, putting up a huge number against Rutgers and Nebraska and teams like that, it's a lot different against Penn State. Because of the situational spot, I like Ohio State some here. I'm always fair as far as Ohio State. I sometimes, say I lean against them. Sometimes I say I lean on them. I almost never bet Ohio State on the side or against them just because I'm such a big fan of the Buckeyes that, it kind of conflicts me too much, and I'd rather just watch the game as a fan. I do think, like I said, this is a good spot for Ohio State. I think the question mark here for Ohio State is, how does their secondary do against Penn State's receivers? Penn State's receivers are really, really good. They have a lot of really good receivers that are very tall. Ohio State's secondary is not near as good as they were last year. That was the strength of the team last year. Obviously, when you lose guys like Hooker and Lattimore, Ohio State's secondary is going to be a lot down from where it was last year. But I think that, Trace McSorley's a good player. I don't think he's a really good quarterback. I think the receivers make him look really good. He can put a lot of balls up for grabs, and they come down with these plays. I think that could happen here against Ohio State. It wouldn't surprise me if they beat Ohio State's secondary in this one. I think that, as good as Saquon Barkley is, I imagine Ohio State's defensive front holds him in check at least pretty well here. I'm a little bit more worried as a fan about Penn State's passing game. And then, like I said, as far as Ohio State's offense, I think the question mark is how does JT Barrett play against a much better defense?
It's so hard because JT Barrett, since that Oklahoma game, 18 touchdowns against no interceptions, and he's looked really efficient running this offense. And maybe it's just a thing where he's more comfortable in this offense. You've got a first-year OC in Kevin Wilson. You've got a first-year quarterbacks coach in Ryan Day. Maybe it just took some time. Maybe they just had to gel. Maybe they just had to figure some things out. But the problem is the level of competition has been so bad that we just don't know. We don't know how much improved JT Barrett actually is. And I know that JT Barrett has a hard time going through his progressions when he gets pressured, likes to get out of the pocket a little bit too quickly. And while he's kind of a savvy runner, he's not the most athletic runner. So I don't know if he can run away. I don't know if he can extend plays the way that we've seen some Ohio State quarterbacks in the past. I don't know. I'm not entirely sure what to expect in this game all the way around, but I think it's worth touching on because you're going to have a lot of people that look at this game and say, okay, well, what do we remember about Ohio State in big games? They lost at home to Oklahoma and looked very bad in doing it. They got shut out by Clemson. Now they're laying 6.5 against Penn State. I think a lot of people, even with Ohio State's very public nature, may come in on Penn State here in this spot. So I'll be very curious to see what happens with the line for this game. We'll hear about how good Urban Meyer is off the bye, and everybody already knows that. And so I don't know, man, but I know I'm very excited to watch this game, and I'm hoping for, as a fan, a really positive outcome for the Buckeyes here in this one.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really looking forward to this game. I think it should be a really good game. We're going to find out a lot about both of these teams. Penn State was in a good situation last weekend. Those whiteout games are intense, tough spot for Michigan. A lot harder spot here for Penn State. If you're just looking at it situationally, this is a better spot for Ohio State by far. But, the number here is no great value. If you're looking to back Ohio State, -6 is no great value on it. I think that's exactly what I would put the line. So I think this will be a really interesting game. And like Adam just said there, I think the point that I like best that you made there is that J.T. Barrett can really leave his progressions too soon and get out of the pocket and try to scramble around. And I don't remember who it was. It was one of my friends has said before that you can't figure out with Barrett if he's the slowest fast guy you've ever seen or the fastest slow guy you've ever seen. Like he's a good runner, but he's not a really good runner. I mean, you don't want Barrett running constantly. And it seems like in some of these big games, Barrett has, ended up running the ball a lot more than you'd want. Ohio State has good running backs. I hope as a fan that Barrett doesn't run, 20 times in this game because I don't think that's a winning recipe.
All I know for sure is I can make the wife drive to the Halloween party because I intend to show up to the party drunk and then continue to keep getting drunker as the day goes along. All right, let's get into the Pick Six segment here. 6 games, rapid-fire fashion. Let's start Friday night. Tulane, who snuck in the back door against South Florida last week, on the road at Memphis. Memphis, a double-digit favorite here, laying 11.
Wow, I did see Tulane. What a backdoor cover from Tulane last week. I'm going to take Memphis in this one. I think Memphis has such a good offense. It's going to be hard for Tulane to keep up. And I think, in general, Tulane, as a team that, has to run the football, they're not going to be able to throw it very much at all. I don't think Tulane's secondary is good enough to hold Riley Ferguson in check for too long. So I'll take Memphis here.
This one's almost right on my number. I've got it 10.5. But with Memphis playing Navy a couple of weeks ago, they've seen an option. The Tulane option's a little bit modified, but it's still an option at its core. So Memphis has seen that. They've faced some other teams that like to run the football quite a bit. So I think their rush defense should be better prepared for this. I also think they score every time they get the football. So if that's the case, I don't know if Tulane's going to be able to keep up. So I would take Memphis, but there's not a ton of line value on it for me. All right, game 119-120 here. Tennessee takes on Kentucky. Big-time rivalry game here in this one. This number opened 4.5. It's now up to as high as 6 at some places. But Pinnacle and Bookmaker at 5.5, so that's the number we'll go with here in the Pick Six.
If you could have seen my reaction when you said this game, I just kind of put my hand on my head and said, oh, my gosh, what do? I can't take Tennessee, so I'll take Kentucky here. I do think that, Kentucky as a team is really not very good. But, what? I can't take Tennessee. What are they going to play like under Butch Jones? I'm going to very hesitantly take Kentucky, but I think this is a really easy game to pass on.
I think so, too. I mean, I'd just like to throw out some of these rivalry games when we get the opportunity to talk about them. But I will say this. One of the things that really caught me off guard last week, and I had to make an adjustment to this in my power ratings, is that Mississippi State went from a 10-point favorite to a 14.5-point favorite against Kentucky, and then beat them 45-7. So maybe I've missed something that's going on with Kentucky, but, I did have to make some adjustments to them. So it is a good reason to touch on the game. So I have my new adjusted number at 5, which is, relatively close to what we're looking at here. But, yeah, I can't back Tennessee. I mean, Butch Jones is a dead man walking, and I don't know where this program is going to go from here. Also, too, I mean, again, we talked about this a little bit with Nebraska a few weeks ago. Tennessee is a name brand team. They have that reputation from what they did back in the 90s when they had Peyton Manning and some of the other guys that have gone through there. And they're a shell of that program. And I don't know how they get back to it. And I don't know, what kind of effect that has long-term on a team. But, that is something that we can evaluate here as we get into the offseason a little bit. All right, let's slide on down the board here for, how about this one? As we're seeing some line movement pop on this game right now. Game 157, 158, New Mexico on the road at Wyoming. Number open 3.5. It's come down to as low as 1 out there in the marketplace now, but -2 still the consensus number.
I would have liked 3.5 better, but I'll take New Mexico in this one. I think that Wyoming has just continued to be overvalued throughout the course of the season based on Allen, the kind of hype he got. Wyoming was losing all game there a couple weeks ago against Utah State. Utah State turned it over 5 or 6 times and allowed Wyoming to come back and win. Then last week, Boise State in a really bad spot there, laying the points against Wyoming, and Wyoming got the cover there. I'll take New Mexico in this one. I think they can run the ball pretty well in Wyoming.
I think so, too. My number was actually the opener of Wyoming -3.5. So the fact that this is moving against where I had the open, because I actually had the open pegged, tells me that there's some very influential money here on New Mexico in this spot, and that's not really a big surprise. All right, how about game 173, 174? USC takes on Arizona State. USC a 2.5-point favorite in this one.
This is a really interesting game. I'm glad you brought this one up. Arizona State's defense, what happened to them? How'd they get so much better on defense? This is a hard one for me. I think I'll take Arizona State in the points. I doubt I'm going to play this game. I see the BetOnline total comes out here at 57, which tells you a lot about what people are starting to think about Arizona State's defense. I imagine a couple weeks ago this total would have came out something like 68. So Arizona State's defense has really been a lot better here the last few weeks. USC, I had Notre Dame last week against USC, and USC played really badly in that game. They can't stop the run. I don't think Arizona State's going to be able to run all over them like Notre Dame did because they don't have the same kind of running game, but Arizona State has a really good home field advantage, so I'll take the points to Arizona State.
Yeah, I think in terms of this game, USC is a team that I've had to adjust down here recently because I've just been off on their numbers. I had them a short favorite last week against Notre Dame. That obviously wasn't the right place to go. I haven't adjusted them down enough, and they're one of those teams a lot like Florida State. The difference, obviously, is that they still have Sam Darnold at quarterback, but they have so much talent, and you have to respect that, and yet they're not maximizing it at all. Clay Helton's just not doing what he should be doing with this team. They're a 2-point conversion away from losing to Utah at home. They got blown out by Notre Dame. I don't know what to do with this Trojans team right now. So even though my numbers suggest taking them, it's Arizona State or nothing for me here until USC proves to me that they can get this thing figured out a little bit. All right, speaking of Notre Dame, they're in an interesting little spot here this week. North Carolina State goes to South Bend. Notre Dame down to a 7.5-point favorite, and a couple of books have already hit 7.
I'll take NC State here. I think this is a difficult spot for Notre Dame. NC State's proven that they can play against really good teams this year. NC State has a really good defensive front. That's the strength of their defense by far. Notre Dame likes to run the ball a lot. I think it'll be harder for them against NC State. I'll take the 7.5.
Yeah, I will too. What I really like about NC State, who, by the way, should be undefeated with wins over Florida State and Louisville, they outplayed South Carolina up and down the field in Charlotte in Week 1. That was a really misleading final score. So we could be talking about a team that's 7-0 going up against Notre Dame and Clemson in the next 2 weeks. And if things work out for them against Clemson, we could be talking about a team that's in the conversation for the college football playoff because they don't hurt themselves. And if you want to go into South Bend and hang around in a game, you can't hurt yourself. I think NC State's very, very good at taking care of the football. I think they do it here. I think Dave Doran's doing a phenomenal job there. I'll take NC State plus the points here in this spot as well. I think that's 5 games, right? So let's go ahead and look at one more here. How about this one? Game 215, 216. Houston takes on South Florida. South Florida, 10.5-point favorite.
Yeah, this is an interesting game, too. I'm going to take South Florida and Houston. What a way to blow a lead last week. I didn't watch that game, but I saw how big they were ahead and then blew it. The Houston defense has been pretty disappointing here a couple times this season. South Florida's been playing better here of late. I know they gave away the cover last week, but, they dominated that game early. I think South Florida can score quite a few here. Houston's offense has been inconsistent. This is not a game I'll actually want to lay 10.5 with. If it were smaller, I might take South Florida, but my lean here is USF minus 10.5.
Yeah, I've got this one right on the number at 10.5, so not a whole lot of line value for me. But I do think, you're looking at the way that this season's playing out for both of these teams, and Houston's regressing, and they're regressing in a big way. I mean, they've kind of switched quarterbacks. They had the transfer and Kyle Allen in there. Now they've gone to Kyle Postma. Ed Oliver's been in and out of the lineup a little bit for them, and obviously he's a great defensive player. But South Florida has the ability to keep the football away from his side of the field, make him kind of chase them around a little bit. They're coming into their own. I know that they didn't play all that well last week against Tulane, but new coordinators, new coaching staff, lost Marlon Mack. They had a lot of things that they had to figure out this year, and the fact that they've just gone out there and scored points and taken care of business, I see no reason why they can't do the same thing here this week. I will look to fade them, though, the following week when they go on the road to UConn, not because I love UConn, but because that's just not a good spot with the bye week coming up. And then, of course, all eyes on that game against Central Florida on November 24th. So let's go ahead and kick the extra point here for today's show. Kyle, what is your exclusive free pick for our show listeners?
Well, I'm going to go to the UCLA and Washington game, and if you've listened to this show in the past, I think you know who I'm going to take in this one. I'm going to take Washington minus 17. I think this is a good spot for Washington to get right. UCLA's defense is really bad. I'm not going to let one game of them looking decent on defense against Oregon with a backup quarterback change my view of them. And I think Washington, kind of was shell-shocked there against Arizona State a couple weeks ago. They have a bye week to get ready for this game. Washington's defense is very good against the pass, very good secondary. Josh Rosen's a good quarterback, but UCLA never gives him enough help. The offensive line's been weak, and obviously just a massive mismatch when it comes to coaching. So I'm going to take Washington minus 17.
I like it. And it gives us a chance to beat up on Jim Mora Jr. when Washington wins that game by 40 next week. So that'd be good for us. Kyle Hunter from HunterSportsPicks.com. What's going on over at the website right now?
So over at the website, if you haven't already signed up for the newsletter, be sure to. You can go to the website at HunterSportsPicks.com and see the newsletter there. It's a free sign-up. 57 and 25, the last 82 free plays sent out. As I've said every time, I'm not going to keep going that kind of rate. Can't keep winning at that rate. But I do feel like, it's valuable information there for free. So sign up for that if you haven't already. And also, with it getting so late in the season, like Adam said, I looked at my pricing, and I wanted to offer a lower price here for the rest of the year. College football totals for the rest of the year for $299, 57.5% all time on college football totals. So I've been very good at college football totals. If you're interested in that for $299 for the rest of the year, email me, Kyle at HunterSportsPicks.com, or message me on Twitter at KyleHunterPicks.
Well, Kyle, lots of stuff going on here. I know you and I are both trying to play catch-up a little bit from the weekend and maybe a little bit of a slow start here on a Monday morning. But thank you so much for joining me, man. I'll talk to you again next week.
Yeah, that sounds good. No wedding this coming weekend. I'll be all football this week. So hopefully we won't miss out on as much this coming week. Thanks, man.